Hi, Candace.
Hi, Juliet.
So nice to see you.
Yeah.
So nice to see you again, and hear how well you're doing with your business. So I'm just going to start by reading your bio, and then we'll get into your interview, which is surviving childhood with a narcissistic mother. And
Yeah.
although you've talked about that a lot over the years to me, or mentioned it a lot over the years, and you've told, I've heard some of the details. I'm looking forward to hearing more of that from you because I'm sure it was an intense, and I'm sure a lot of other words could be used when we'll hear about that. So
Yeah.
first, let's read your bio. I mean,
Okay.
first of all, you are a therapist. You're an addictions therapist here in Vancouver, and you specialize in working with the family and other loved ones of people who are struggling with addiction. And you have an online family addiction therapy program for family members. And you have been doing this for more than 25 years, helping addicts and their loved ones
Yeah.
uh, overcome their dysfunctional behaviors and make healthier lifestyle choices. You grew up with a narcissistic mother, so you know all about that, which is what we're talking about today. And also, you have a book that's won several awards called Loving an Addict, Loving Yourself, the top 10 survival tips for loving someone with an addiction. And that's at your website at candaceplattor.com. And
Right.
I'll have the link below as well,
Thank
so
you.
people can click on it.
Yeah.
So let's get started here, Candace, and tell me, like, I know you've said your mother was narcissistic. Can you tell me, like, some of her behaviors that indicated, like, now as an adult, that she was narcissistic?
Right. Well, I'm going to say hi to everyone and just let you know that I may be clearing my throat this morning. So, um, yeah, my mother was, she's gone now. She was, I would say, intellectually brilliant. And she also was very extroverted and very social, and people just loved her. And she was a professor and an author herself, and um, she was very well known in her field. She um, just was able to get along with everybody. It was just kind of an amazing thing to watch. But my mother was very different at home. And so people would often come up to me and say, "Oh, you're so lucky to be her daughter," you know? And I would be thinking, not so much.
Mhm.
So some of the behaviors that you're asking about, well, she was incredibly self-focused, very self-absorbed. Everything revolved around her. Um, Kind of like she took up all the space in the room when she walked in. Everybody had to like her. All the attention had to go to her. And somehow she was able to do that. I don't know how. I don't have the same charisma. I'm glad I don't have the same charisma actually, but um, so she was very self-absorbed. She was, there are a couple of traits that are given with narcissism, and two of them are grandiose and
Mhm.
histrionic. So my mother was very grandiose. She believed that she was the most important person. And that's a grandiose thing to think, that nobody else's opinion mattered as much as hers did, that kind of stuff. Hard to grow up with. Histrionic is when you're kind of a diva, you're kind of a drama queen. Um, if you don't get your own way, then something's going to happen, right? And what often happened with her was not yelling, screaming, getting upset, but more the silent treatment. I remember my mother not talking to me for days
As
when she was
punishment.
as punishment when she was upset with me. She would just not talk to me. She
Wow.
would just pass by me and not look at me, not talk to me. I'm not there.
And was it something specific she was angry with you about, or just was it random?
I think it was both, you know. I think sometimes she was upset with me. And sometimes she was upset with whatever she was upset with, and
Right.
she just,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I
Didn't feel
happened
like,
to I
right.
happened to be there, you
Mm-hmm.
know. One of the things that that my mother said to me, she had a few choice things to say to me every day that were really hard for me. But I think the one that I had to grapple with as an adult more than any other was that nobody wanted to hear what I had to say. Nobody wants to hear what you have to say. Don't even tell me. Don't even talk about it because nobody cares. And I don't want to hear it. That was the message that I got pretty much every day, right, when I wanted to put an opinion forth. Um, as a result, I flew under the radar as best I could because it was emotionally dangerous for me not to. She wasn't physical with me, she didn't hit me, that kind of thing, but emotionally, I was a sensitive child. I was introverted. I was shy, and I had no sense of self at all. So she would tell me that, and I believed her for a really long time.
And what about, did you have siblings or a father in the picture?
Yeah, I have my father. My father and mother divorced when I was about 17. I have an older brother. He's about 4 years older than me. He was pretty much out of the house at university by the time that divorce was taking place. But, you know, Dr. Phil, I'm not the biggest fan of Dr. Phil, but every once in a while he says something really useful.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things he said, I heard him say on his show, was children would rather come from a broken home
Mm-hmm.
than live in one.
Mm-hmm.
I lived in one. My brother and I both lived in one, and it affected him too, maybe in some different ways, but it definitely affected both of us.
So how did your father deal with your mother, or how did she treat him? What was their dynamic?
Well, from what I can remember and glean, he didn't deal with it very well, and he didn't protect us from it.
Mm-hmm.
So, when we were emotionally abused or neglected, um, he didn't come to us and say, look, let's talk about this. It's okay. I love you. There wasn't any of that stuff. My father was more introverted. He wasn't as social. He had his own charm, and he had some addictions that helped to tear the family apart. But he, I think he had some difficulty living with someone in a marriage where she had to take up all the space.
So he was more passive in relation to her.
I think so,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And I mean, they did argue, but most of the time they were quiet, and a lot of the time they didn't talk to each other. They were high school sweethearts, that
Mm-hmm.
whole thing. And I'm glad to be here, very glad to be here, but they probably should never have gotten married or have children. And that was
Mm-hmm.
one of the other things that my mother would tell me. I don't know if she told my brother this, but she told me often that she never wanted to have children.
Mm-hmm.
They got in the way of her professional, you know,
Mm-hmm.
um, so
Career. Mm-hmm.
career. Yeah, she just didn't want to have children, and she let her children know that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So one of the other things about narcissists is that they lack empathy.
Mm-hmm.
And empathy is the ability to be able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and have a sense of how they're feeling and doing. So can you imagine a mother telling her children, I never wanted to have you. I wish you weren't here. There's absolutely zero empathy in that kind of statement, right? And
Yes.
it triggers the kids a lot from
Well,
my
I,
experience.
I imagine it kind of makes you feel like you're not worthwhile. You shouldn't have been born.
Kind of,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean it one of the other things that they did, my father had his own, like I say, his own addiction, so his own self-absorption. He wasn't narcissistic in the same way, but he was very self-absorbed. And he liked moving around a lot. And so he moved the family to all of these different places all the time. And I remember one time were, we had just moved and we unpacked everything. And then about 6 weeks later, we moved again. Who knows why? I have my
Wow.
theories, but I don't know why. And so, as a sensitive, shy child with no
Mm-hmm.
real safe place at home, I was always the new kid on the block. So
Mm-hmm.
flying under the radar was what I learned how to do for
Mm-hmm.
a long time.
Mm-hmm. So, with your mother, she lacked empathy and she was very self-absorbed. Was she ever kind to you or give you
Oh
any
yeah,
affection?
yes, she
Yeah.
was. And that almost made it worse because you never knew when that was going to happen, and you never knew when the other shoe was going to drop. And um, yeah, she could be very kind, she could be very sweet to us, but it didn't last long, and it wasn't
Mm-hmm.
very often. And it's like, you know, it's like the crumbs. I
Right.
learned how to expect crumbs from people. So those are the crumbs. And anytime I got those, it was like, wow, but it wasn't nurturing, it wasn't nourishing, and it ended, it stopped. So you can only imagine what that did in terms of my relationships with friends, with
Mm-hmm.
men, with, those kinds of relationships,
Mm-hmm.
what I thought I was worth, what I expected. And I think I probably set some of those relationships up that way because it's what I knew. It's what I was comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Set them up in what way?
well, I think I probably was attracted to people who were self-absorbed,
Mm-hmm.
both women and men, friends
Mm-hmm.
and romantic relationships where, I remember I was in theater when I was younger, which is an interesting thing to do for a kid who flew under the radar, but I enjoyed it. And I went out with this guy who was so attractive. I mean, model material, right? I remember the first time I went to his house, and he had photos of himself all over his walls, like framed and
Right.
big photos of himself. And it just took me back. If people know the Mary Tyler Moore Show, I mean, I know that dates me, but it's a wonderful show. And they had the newscaster Ted Baxter, right, who had a dressing room with photos of himself all over the wall because he was narcissistic. So, that's the kind of man that I was attracted to. And of course, it made me feel totally unworthy,
Right.
right?
Right.
But
So,
comfortable.
yes, because it was familiar to you, yes.
Yeah.
Uh, let's talk more about some of the impact that your mother's behavior and your upbringing had on you. So, you just mentioned your relationships that you were attracted to people that were self-absorbed. What other impact did it have on you?
Yeah. And I'll just say around that, that creates a codependency in relationships that um, stays with people often for life until they get some help to heal that. Please get some help and heal that because I'm a living example of somebody who's healed that, right? You can do it. Um, so um, I'll give you an example. I was on a trip with my mother. It was just me and her, which was probably not a great idea in the first place. But I was about to graduate university and I had been in the theater department and I was doing really well. I was going to get a BFA and I was going to go into, entertainment of some sort. And I remember riding on a train with her in England, and she said to me, you really don't have the talent to do this. You really shouldn't. I think what you need to do is you need to go into education and teach so that you have something to fall back on because you're not going to make it in that field. So I don't know if she was right or wrong, but it wasn't about whether she was right or wrong. It was
Hmm.
about having absolutely no support and having
Hmm.
somebody, when you have a narcissist, the people around them, especially their loved ones, become extensions of them.
Hmm.
So what they do in their lives reflects inordinately on the narcissist.
Hmm.
So if you've got a kid who's not doing very well, you feel terrible about that. You feel somehow like that's your, it's about you, because everything's about you when you're a narcissist. So she wanted to make sure that I didn't fail. In a way, that's good parenting, but that's not where it was coming from.
Right.
Right.
She didn't want it to reflect badly on her.
Right. And, today I can say what I did was I went into education and I taught English and drama for a really long time. And I enjoyed it. Today, I'm so glad to be who I am. And everything along my way led me to who I am. So I don't carry that kind of resentment anymore. But
Hmm.
man, that's really, I was just going to swear. It's a really awful thing to say to a child.
Hmm. And obviously it had a big impact on you because was that the major reason you didn't pursue theater anymore?
Yeah, and it's a
Hmm.
codependency, right? I
Hmm.
pleased my mother instead of pleasing me, and that
Hmm.
just was second nature because it
Hmm.
was dangerous not to please her.
And you believed her on some level too.
Yeah, I had no
Hmm.
sense of me,
Hmm. Hmm.
so sure, you know.
Hmm. So what other, as an adult, I know you've done a lot of work on yourself, but before we talk about what got you healthy, what
Mm.
other impacts and how you were as a younger adult before you kind of got on the road to healing?
Mm. Well, I think one of the things that happened to me that was a direct result of this, I believe, is that I developed Crohn's disease.
Hmm.
And I was 23. That was about a year after this trip I told you about.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I had no idea what was happening to me. I was so sick, and the doctors, Crohn's was a new disease at that point. So they didn't know what to do for me. And what they did for me was they gave me a lot of addictive medications, and I became an addict.
Right.
Because at that time, it was the early 70s, and people didn't know. I mean, addiction wasn't on the radar the way it
Hmm.
is today.
Hmm.
Doctors are still doing this today, unfortunately, but you
Especially
know,
prescription medication
yeah,
addictions. Hmm.
for sure.
Hmm.
So they gave me opioids, they gave me OxyContin and codeine and Demerol and all that stuff. They gave me benzos, they gave me Valium and Ativan and clorazepam and all kinds of different drugs over the years. And I spent a good 15 years, or a bad 15 years, being addicted. And
Hmm.
I didn't know I was addicted. I just know that at the end of that, I was so depressed because all of those substances are depressants in the human
Hmm.
system. So I was so depressed that I was suicidal, and I really was um, considering taking my life. And I got really scared one day about that. I knew that I had enough pills and I could time it so nobody would find me in time. I had a plan, I had opportunity, I had the means, and it really scared me. So I reached out for help and spent a month in a psych ward, which is an interesting place to be, um, getting some help and learning about addiction and starting to go to programs. And that was the beginning of my recovery. But you know, my mother had colitis, which is the same basic disease
Hmm.
as Crohn's. It's just in a different place in the bowel, so it has
Hmm.
different symptoms. But there was no empathy for me. She knew how she suffered with it. There was no empathy about my suffering at all, and I was very, very sick. So um, yeah, so that was one of the other ways, and
Hmm.
the addiction that came with that. Um, I believe that my body just finally imploded on itself, and
Right.
I had the genetic predisposition for a bowel disease because she had that, and it was a nightmare for a really long time.
Hmm. And just the stress in your physical body of growing up in that home environment as well,
Yep,
right?
yep. And I don't know, if I hadn't developed Crohn's, would I have become an addict? Maybe,
Hmm.
because we use addictions to not have to feel what we feel. We use
Hmm.
addictions to stuff it down, stuff it down, stuff it down. I had other ways to do that, without substances, but I was smoking a pretty fair amount of pot when I was in my teens, because I went to high school in New Orleans for 2 years, and that was fun in the 60s, and everybody was smoking pot then. So, some of it was fun, but most of my life was really difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And until that turning point then, how old were you when you started to get help and you went into the psychiatric ward?
I was 37 at that
Okay, so
time.
that's when your life began to turn around. Did you get off all those medications at that point?
Pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much. I mean, with something like Crohn's, they say it's an incurable illness. I still do deal with it. I'm much healthier now because I take better care of myself. I know how to do that now. But, every once in a while, the bowel just kind of kinks up. And, you know, there were times when I've needed painkiller.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly a lot of times going to ER because I didn't want to have it in the house. So I'd go and get a shot of
Mm-hmm.
Demerol or something if
Mm-hmm.
it was really bad. But pretty much, yeah, because I just couldn't, and that was a nightmare too. I mean, coming off Valium was worse than coming off the opioids, but the combination was, I wish it on nobody,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which is why I do the work I do.
And so what else did you do when that healing journey began? Like how did you heal over the
Mm,
years and bringing you right up to today where you are today?
yeah. And I'm 31 years clean and sober today.
Congrats today.
Not today, but
Oh, but now, yeah. Oh,
no, I'm coming up to,
congratulations.
yeah, my birthday, my clean and sober birthday is in July. So I'm coming
Oh,
up to
wow.
2 years now.
Great.
Um, well, when I was in the psych ward, I met two other people who were also coming off drugs. And one of them had had a psychotic break. She was in detox and she tried to hold everybody hostage in the detox center with a fork.
Hmm.
Right. Okay. Enough said. But I met these two people, and we'd sit around a table and we'd pretend to be, and we'd pass it on. I mean, there was no joint, but we'd pass it on. And they were going to Narcotics Anonymous every day. There was a meeting right across the street, and so I started going with them. And it was a very interesting experience to be around a lot of bikers, like really big, bulky, tattooed leather chains bikers who were talking about effing this and effing that, and, when they shared. But they were really amazing. I mean, they intimidated the hell out of this little shy kid, but they, I would sit in meetings and just weep at the beginning. I would just weep. And they would come and they would hug me and they would say, keep coming back. Keep coming back. Nobody had ever told me to keep coming back. So there I was with them, and it was great. So I kept coming back, and I stayed in 12-step programs for about 10 years, and went into treatment as well in the beginning, and um, really learned about addiction and learned about codependency, and went to a lot of different 12-step programs. That was the beginning of my recovery. I don't go to 12-step programs anymore. I'm not in alignment with their philosophy of addiction, but there are some wonderful things about 12-step programs. So if people are thinking of going, one of them is you meet like-minded people
Mm-hmm.
who are glad that you're there. And most addicts don't think that anybody is glad that they're there anywhere.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and they've got clean and sober activities, and they've got dances, and they've got sponsorship, and people go for coffee and you become friends, and it's a great thing. It's just the philosophy of powerlessness that I have a trouble with. But
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, and what else did you do? You went to Narcotics Anonymous for 10 years, and what else was part of your growth and healing?
I had an amazing therapist for many years, um, and he was so accepting of me. It didn't matter what I told him, what I talked about, things that I had never spoken about before. You know, I started gradually just feeling better about myself. And then um, I think the thing that really changed was when I wrote my book. That's when everything sort of fell into place, was when I wrote my book and it was published. And um, I just had this book in me. I wanted to help people who had family members who were addicted, because I knew some ways that I was working with clients that was actually working. And, you know, I'm an addict. I'm a loved one of addicts. I'm a professional who's worked with addiction for a while. And I knew some things that other people didn't know. So I wanted to write a book. And then the book won USA and International Book Awards, much to my own surprise, because honestly, Juliet, you know, if you had told me that I was ever going to do anything that would help the world, like, I would have told you you were nuts, because I didn't feel that way about myself.
Except you knew you were helping clients because you were already a therapist.
I did, I knew that, but I, yeah, and that came later, but
Hmm.
but even so, you know, when this book won these awards, what happened was that I started getting phone calls and emails for interviews like this
Hmm.
one.
Hmm.
And I remember the first few interviews I had, probably the first year after that, I thought I was going to throw up before every single one of them, because nobody wanted to hear what I had to say,
Right. Right.
except people did.
Hmm.
And that was really scary for me.
Hmm.
I had a comfort zone here, you know. You're making me come out of my comfort zone. Um, and you know, it's taken me a while to just understand that my mother was wrong. She
Hmm.
would never admit that, but she was wrong.
Hmm.
She just was. And narcissists are often wrong.
Hmm.
They do things in their own self-interest that are often wrong for other people. We see this in our politicians today,
Hmm.
who are doing things in their own self-interest, and a lot of
Hmm.
people suffer for that.
Hmm.
And the other thing that I, you know, really learned over the years about narcissism, which helped me heal a lot, so I'm going to give you guys the secret, is that is twofold. One is that somebody who's narcissistic is perhaps the most insecure person walking on the planet. Narcissists are so insecure. This is why they need all of this attention. This is why if somebody disagrees with them or doesn't show them loyalty or things like that, that they just hit the roof, because it feeds into their belief that they're nothing.
Hmm.
Kind of like the Wizard of Oz, who seems to be the most powerful person in all of Oz land, you know. And when the wizard is finally discovered and that curtain is pulled back, there's this little skinny man in his boxer shorts with a megaphone. Classic.
Hmm.
Okay. The other thing I learned is that it was never about me. What my mother did to me was not about me. It was about her. And when I finally understood that with my head and let it trickle down, it wasn't about me. That was probably the most healing thing ever for me. And now I also know that whatever anybody does or says isn't about me. It's about them. We all have our
Hmm.
filters that we see life through, you know. I don't have to worry about what somebody else thinks of me, which is one of the reasons I can get up on stage now, you know, and speak. I don't have to worry about that,
Hmm.
except I do anyway, but
Well, as we were saying earlier, it's normal to have some anxiety about
yeah,
speaking.
yeah, yeah.
You're
Seeing
doing,
them naked doesn't seem to help, you know. So
and you've had some fairly big audiences too, have you not?
Yeah, I yeah, I started small when I started speaking, and I'm gonna back up if I can.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Um, I wrote an article in 2013, so about 5 or 6 years ago, um, talking about my view of addiction and how that's different from the 12-step view. And it was, what if addiction, the title, what if addiction isn't really a disease? Well, within, I was blogging for the Huffington Post, so they published it. And within a couple of hours, I had like 200 or more comments, most of them very negative.
Hmm.
What the hell do you know? You don't know anything. Really, a lot of swearing and a lot of bad language, calling me bad things. Um, yeah, you're just crazy. Somebody called me a muffin top, or I don't know, something stupid like that. But it really shook me. It shook me to my core. And I remember thinking to myself, I am never, ever, ever going to put forth an opinion again, because this is the danger. This is what happens. Nobody cares what I have to say anyway, so I'm not going to do it. And that lasted for maybe, you know, a few minutes, maybe a month, but not for long. And then I started to realize this is not about me. If you're going to talk to me that way, if you're going to be disrespectful to me because we disagree on something, that's all about you. I don't need to go there. What a freeing thing to understand.
Hmm. What
I
helped
think,
you get to that place? Was it just
uh,
time and reflection that you
I think
finally
it
you just,
was,
yeah.
yeah, I think it was time, reflection,
Hmm.
reading good books about this
Hmm.
kind of thing. Um, just, I don't know. I can't pinpoint what,
Right.
you know.
Well, and what's interesting about that is that the more you put yourself out there, writing books, speaking, the more likely you are to be criticized.
Mm.
I mean, you'll get good things said about you, but you'll also get the negative stuff. And a lot of people, like you said in that article, 200 people or so were writing negative stuff. I mean, people, if they disagree, sometimes they're more motivated to attack, right? I mean,
Well,
to
and
say something.
especially if they've got another 199 people agreeing with them,
Yeah.
then they're really, and there were a few interspersed positive comments, but after they were bullied, cyberbullied, they didn't say anything anymore.
I
So
imagine that a lot of these people were in the program, in the AA program. I'm just guessing.
probably,
Yeah.
probably,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, they were in their boxer shorts with their megaphone.
Hmm.
Um, but it was interesting because I spoke at the Get Inspired Vancouver event in the fall, and I talked about how addiction is a choice, because I mean, I don't think people become addicts by choice. I didn't. I
Hmm.
don't think we choose that. But to stay in it, I think is a choice.
Hmm.
Absolutely. It's an absolute choice. I'm living proof of that. You can get out of it, you can stay in it. Um, and And after my talk, which got 5 sitting ovations, apparently a sitting ovation is a thing where people are clapping and, for
So
things that
it's
I
what the
said.
length of time they clap is, or what is?
No, no, they did it 5 times during my 15-minute
Oh,
talk.
during the talk. I see.
Yeah, which I
Okay.
did not expect at all. And afterwards, I had a lot of people come to me and say, thank you for saying what you said. And it was so gratifying, you know, but I'm still going to say what I say, even if people disagree with me, because I
Hmm.
know that there are people who don't, and I know that it doesn't work to look at addiction as a disease that you're powerless over. You're not. So I need to keep talking about that.
Hmm. Hmm.
And for somebody with my past, being raised by my parents, having the experiences that I've had in terms of being bullied, cyberbullied, and otherwise, for me to be doing this, I'm going to be doing a TED Talk on Saturday, a TEDx. That's crazy. And it's amazing.
Hmm.
And I'm proud of myself. I mean, I
Well,
hope
you
I do
should
well. And
be.
I'm nervous, but I'm also proud of myself because I came out of this, and we can. If you're if you're struggling with a narcissist, please get some help from somebody who knows how to help you.
Mhm. Let's shift into that right now. And what advice, other than what you've said already, would you give to someone who, let's say, has grown up with a narcissist or is in a relationship with somebody who's showing narcissistic traits, like in terms of how to keep themselves safe? Like, of course, I mean, you could say that they should leave if it's a spouse or something, but sometimes people don't make that choice right away, or aren't ready to make that choice, or are afraid to make that choice, or they have children, or whatever the case may
Yep.
be. So if they choose to stay, at least in the interim, what advice would you have for them to keep themselves as safe and as sane as possible?
Well, I guess the first thing would be to learn about narcissism.
Hmm.
Some of the things that I've said today about narcissism are really important things for you to know. So you might want to listen to this interview again, just to be able to get some of those things. What they're doing is because they feel insecure. It's a better than worse than system. So if somebody feels worse than, I'm going to get my hands up here. If somebody
Hmm.
feels worse than other people, what do they have to do to feel better? They have to go up here,
Hmm.
and they have to make these people feel even worse, right? So they have to bully them, or, you know, um, so that's not about you. And the other thing that I would say is that I believe that self-respect, which to me is a different thing than self-esteem, I can explain that if you want, but self-respect is the most important thing we either have or don't have. I lived without it for a really long time. Not negotiable in my life anymore. But I need to respect myself first before other people are going to respect me.
Hmm.
Why should they? If I'm not taking care of me in all kinds of ways, why should somebody else respect me?
Hmm.
Same thing. If you're not taking care of yourself and blah, blah, blah. Um, so I think I will just explain it really briefly. Self-esteem is when somebody says to you, it's from the outside in. It's when somebody says, "Oh, you're doing really well," and that kind of stuff. You're raising a great family, you're doing well at your job, whatever. You're doing really well. That's nice, but self-respect comes from the inside. So self-esteem is from the outside in, self-respect is from the inside out. And nobody can give us our self-respect. Only we can do that. Only we can earn that by doing the next right thing for ourselves and the next right thing after that. If if you're choosing to stay in a relationship that has narcissism in it for whatever your reasons, I would encourage you to look at your level of self-respect, because I know for sure that you do not deserve the treatment you're getting. And the more you put up with the treatment you're getting, the more of that treatment you'll get.
Hmm.
Now, I understand when people have children and there are reasons for why they stay. Even if you're going to stay, start working on your own self-respect so that when you do decide to leave, you can do that.
And do you have any tips for starters on getting back your self-respect or finding self-respect?
Yes. Um, One of the things that that I like to ask my clients, and I ask it of myself as well, is, who do you want to show up as in the world? What kind of person do you want to be? Do you want to be somebody who allows themselves to be squashed down and bullied and trampled and emotionally abused and maybe even physically or sexually abused? Do you want to be that person? I think probably most people don't.
Hmm.
Who do you want to show up as in the world? Do you want to be a man or a woman with respect, with self-respect, who can hold their head high, who are doing the best that they can, really the best that they can for themselves and for their children? Because that's another thing. If you're staying because of the children, I mean, I understand that there are financial aspects, but if you're staying in a narcissistic relationship because of the children, you are subjecting your children to what I got. Not fun.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not the best plan.
Mm-hmm.
So just something to think about. But
Mm-hmm.
who do you want to be? Like, who are you and who do you want to be? And how can you change that? Right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And last question for you, Candace. What advice do you have for therapists who are either working with someone who is a narcissistic or has tendencies, or somebody that has a family member? And I'm sure because of your work with family members of addicts, you probably come across a lot of the family members also, their addict family members also has narcissistic traits as well, I'm assuming.
Well, the really interesting caveat with that is that most therapists don't work with narcissists because narcissists don't go to therapy. Nothing
Exactly.
wrong with
Yeah,
them. Nothing wrong with them.
exactly.
It's about everybody else. So, I've had narcissists in my office because they wanted to be here to help the other person ostensibly.
Hmm.
They
Hmm.
really wanted to kind of shine about how good they are and how bad the other person is. But um, you know, narcissists are not very fun to work with because they don't want to work. They don't want to
Hmm.
change anything.
Hmm.
They somehow it's working for them. They can find, even if somebody leaves their sphere, they can find other people who will adore them. Narcissists need to be adored all the time because they feel so bad about themselves deep down. Um, so for therapists, I think the most important thing is to really learn about narcissism, to really know what that is and why it is and what, we can only change ourselves. We can't change somebody else. So that's the serenity prayer. So learn how to help your client change what they need to about themselves and don't be trying to help them change the narcissist. Ain't going to
Hmm.
happen. That's useless time, a bad expenditure of money.
Hmm.
Therapists really need to understand that. Um, oh, and another thing about for therapists is do your own inner work because many of us, myself included, don't get into this field because we're healthy. It took me a long time to be a healthy therapist, I think.
Hmm.
I mean, I tried my best, but it took me a while. So do your own inner work. If you have any issues around narcissism, did you grow up with narcissism? Are you in a relationship with a narcissist? Like, do your own work before you try to help somebody else. So those are really important things, I think. Do your own stuff and learn the truth about narcissism.
Hmm.
You get a narcissist that's just as big as life, bigger than life. A lot of people with dysfunctional backgrounds can be very overwhelmed and intimidated by that. And we're seeing that in our politics today too.
Hmm. Hmm.
People enable narcissists to stay narcissistic.
Right.
Not a helpful thing. We need
Hmm.
to stop enabling narcissists so that they go get help. But um, yeah, so do your own work and really learn about narcissism so that you can help who you're with. But they're not
That
going to change their narcissist.
that's a great advice. Well, Candace, thank you so much for doing this. I was just thinking as I was listening to you, you're really amazing. Like your whole life story is very amazing, and it shows your strength, your courage, your self-respect, and also just how open you are and genuine you are in sharing that. I've always really appreciated that about you, and I think your clients must really appreciate that. And when you're speaking, I still have to watch that talk of yours that you've done, but
Yeah.
I'm sure that you're that way when you speak as well. So thank you so much, and
Thank you.
congratulations to you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll take that today. Yeah. Thank you.